In June of 1997, 15 middle school children set out for a weekend camping trip. Their teachers signed permission slips. Their parents packed lunches and sleeping bags. But when the buses returned to Lake Wycliffe campground, they were empty. No footprints, no screams, just silence. For 26 years, no one has seen them again. This is not just a missing persons case. It is a story of secrets buried in the soil, of families who never stopped searching, and of the things waiting in the dark when no one is watching. The case of the abandoned school camp. If you're new here, subscribe. The lake was always quiet at night, even in June, when the air clung heavy and the cicadas screamed. Lake Wycliffe had a way of swallowing sound. The water lay still, dark as oil, with only the occasional ripple from a catfish breaking the surface. Around it, the pines rose tall and watchful, branches weaving together like a canopy meant to hide the world beneath. On the evening of June 14, 1997, 2 buses rumbled down the gravel road toward the campground. Dust billowed behind them, catching the orange smear of sunset. Inside, voices rang out. 15 children, restless and giddy with the thrill of a weekend away from home. They were 7th graders from Jefferson Middle School, a collection of kids bound by nothing more than the bad luck of sharing a homeroom and a counselor who thought fresh air could cure suburban boredom. Their laughter was ordinary. Their plans ordinary. Ghost stories, marshmallows, fishing lines dropped in shallow water. Ordinary children on an ordinary trip. By Monday morning, they would be gone. The buses were found parked neatly at the trailhead, engines off, keys still in the ignitions. Inside, the driver's belongings sat untouched. A thermos of coffee, a crossword puzzle folded open to a half-finished grid. No driver, no children. The campsite lay a mile down the trail, nestled beside the lake. When search teams arrived hours later, they froze at what they saw. The campfires still smoldered. Sleeping bags were unzipped and laid open as though their owners had simply stepped away. A deck of playing cards fluttered across the dirt, scattered by wind. A boombox buzzed faintly with static, its cassette tape chewed by the machine. Plates of food rested by the logs, hot dogs, marshmallows charred black, bites taken but never swallowed. But it wasn't the emptiness that chilled the investigators. It was the claw marks. On at least 9 trees surrounding the camp, deep gouges marred the bark. Long, desperate scratches, as if someone had raked their fingernails against the wood until they tore away. The higher ones stretched nearly 8 feet from the ground. Blood dotted some of the grooves. The initial search lasted 7 days. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs traced the perimeter. Divers combed the lake. But aside from the eerie scene at the campground, nothing was found. No bodies, no footprints leading away. Not a single piece of clothing, not even a lost shoe. It was as though 15 children had risen into the sky and disappeared. The media descended within hours. The vanished 15, one local station called them, splashing their school portraits across the evening news. Families huddled together in gymnasiums converted into command centers, clutching paper cups of coffee gone cold, eyes red from tears and lack of sleep. Rumors began immediately. Some said it was a mass abduction, the work of a cult. Others whispered about the lake, that it was bottomless, that it swallowed children whole. Old-timers in town recalled strange lights in the woods decades earlier. Hunters who went missing and never returned. The stories clung to the case, feeding its legend even as the official investigation stalled. Within 3 months, the search was scaled back. Within a year, funding dried up. But the parents never stopped. Every June 14th, they gathered at the edge of Lake Wycliffe, candles in hand, photographs pressed to their chests. They whispered names into the darkness, names that had once belonged to laughing, muddy-faced children now frozen in time. In 2023, 26 years later, a hiker stumbled across something in those same woods, Something that changed the case forever. It was a torn backpack, blue nylon faded to gray, half buried beneath pine needles. Inside, a moldy notebook. The last entry was dated June 14th, 1997. The handwriting was cramped and rushed, a child's scrawl pressed hard into the paper. "It's back. It's outside the tents. Don't make a sound." The notebook lay on the evidence table, its blue nylon cover mottled with mildew. The paper inside was swollen, warped by years of damp, but still intact. Under the fluorescent lights of the Travis County Sheriff's Office, the words written in childish scrawl seemed almost to glow. "It's back. It's outside the tents. Don't make a sound." Detective Claire Whitfield read the line for the 7th time, her gloved fingers hovering just above the page. She had worked homicide for 20 years, seen the aftermath of violence in every shape imaginable, but something about the sentence tugged at her differently. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the hand that had written them. Small, pressing so hard into the paper that the pencil had nearly ripped through. The kind of writing only a terrified child could leave behind. Across the table, Sergeant Joe Martinez leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Hiker found it near Whitecliff, about a half-mile from the old campground. Said it was tangled in roots, like the forest tried to swallow it. Claire's eyes flicked to the rest of the notebook. Most of the entries were banal. Games of tag, complaints about food, a list of who had the best marshmallows. The normal chatter of children playing at being independent. Until the last page. Until the sentence that cut everything short. "Whose bag?" she asked quietly. Martinez slid a file toward her. Inside was a faded school portrait. Round cheeks, a crooked smile, dark hair that curled around his ears. Evan Rowe, age 12. One of the 15. Claire closed the file slowly. She remembered the case. Everyone in Texas law enforcement did, even if they had been rookies at the time. The vanished 15. It had haunted the state for decades, the kind of unsolved mystery that lived on in documentaries and late-night radio shows. And now, here it was again, landing on her desk like an echo. The discovery hadn't yet reached the media, but Claire knew it would. Parents would get phone calls. Reporters would swarm the lake again, old wounds would split open, and behind it all, 15 children would still be missing, frozen in time. She tapped the notebook gently. "Get me the parents. All of them, the ones still alive. We'll need their DNA samples, statements, anything they've been holding on to. If this is real, if this is from 97, then maybe we finally have a place to start." Martinez exhaled, nodding. "You think it'll hold up after all these years?" Claire looked back down at the sentence, at the desperate scrawl pressed into the page. "It has to." The first parent they reached was Margaret Rowe. She still lived in the same brick house on South Lamar, the one she had refused to leave even after her husband begged her to move somewhere less painful. The yard was overgrown now, shrubs choking the porch, a swing creaking faintly in the afternoon breeze. When Claire and Martinez stepped up to knock, the sound of the swing chains rattling seemed to echo the unease in their stomachs. Margaret answered the door with the weariness of someone who had long ago stopped expecting good news. Her hair, once chestnut, was now streaked with gray and pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a cardigan despite the heat, sleeves tugged down as if she needed the extra protection. "Mrs. Rowe," Claire said gently, "I'm Detective Whitfield. This is Sergeant Martinez. May we come in?" Margaret studied their badges, her lips thinning. "This is about Evan, isn't it?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust and old photographs. Every wall bore reminders of the boy. Framed portraits, a baseball jersey mounted in glass, a science fair ribbon yellowed with time. Margaret led them to the living room, where she perched on the edge of an armchair as though bracing herself for impact. Claire set the evidence photo of the backpack on the coffee table. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for it, fingertips grazing the torn fabric. "This was his," she whispered. "I sewed that patch myself." He wouldn't go anywhere without it. Her voice cracked, and she pressed her fist to her mouth. Claire let the silence stretch. Sometimes silence was kinder than words. When Margaret finally spoke again, her tone was sharper. Why now? After all these years, why does this show up now? That's what we're trying to find out, Claire said. We need your permission to take a DNA sample. It'll help us confirm the notebook belonged to Evan. Margaret nodded immediately, almost too quickly. Take whatever you need. Just don't let this be another dead end. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of phone calls and doorsteps, of parents clinging to memories like lifelines. Some had remarried, some had moved, some had already passed on, but each reacted to the news in their own way. One father collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing. Another cursed them out, furious at the idea of reopening wounds the world had forced him to scar over. A mother handed Claire a shoebox of birthday cards her daughter had made before she vanished, whispering that maybe one of them still held a trace of DNA. By the end of the week, Claire's desk was buried in files. Each folder contained a child's name, their face frozen in school photo awkwardness. Evan Rowe, Marisol Vega, Jonah Kirk, Lila Tran, Daniel Harris, and 10 more. 15 bright futures cut short by a single weekend in the woods. At night, Claire found herself staring at those faces, wondering what they would look like now. 26 years older. Would they be married? Have children of their own? Or would they all still look 12, preserved in whatever place had taken them? She thought about the last line in the notebook. It's back. It's outside the tents. Don't make a sound. The words replayed in her head as though whispered directly into her ear. On the following Monday, Claire drove to Lake Wycliffe. The campground had long been abandoned, its facilities shut down after the disappearance, the land left to rot. Chain-link fencing sagged around the perimeter, plastered with rusted "no trespassing" signs. The forest pressed close on all sides, as though eager to reclaim the space. She parked at the old ranger station and stepped out, gravel crunching under her boots. The air smelled of pine and stagnant water. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered at a trunk, the sound hollow and lonely. Martinez was already waiting by the trailhead, sipping coffee from a dented thermos. "You sure about this?" he asked, squinting at her. "It's not like the scene's fresh. 26 years of rain and wind. Nothing left to see." "Maybe," Claire said. "But sometimes places hold memories. Sometimes you can feel what happened." The trail wound down through the trees, roots snaking across the dirt. After a mile, the lake emerged, glinting dark through the branches. The campsite was still there, or what was left of it. Rotting tents sagged in the mud, their nylon eaten through by time. The fire pits were black with ash, weeds sprouting between the stones. A picnic table lay on its side, one leg missing. Claire crouched beside a tree. The bark bore faint scars, long vertical grooves that had healed but not vanished. She touched the ridges with her gloved hand. "Claw marks," she murmured. Martinez came to stand beside her. "Kids messing around?" Claire shook her head. "Too deep. Too desperate." She straightened, staring at the lake. Its surface was glassy, reflecting the gray sky above. She imagined 15 children huddled in tents, whispering about something moving outside. Imagined them pressing their fingernails into bark until they split. She shivered despite the heat. Back at the station, the forensics team confirmed the notebook's authenticity. The graphite was consistent with 1990s-era pencils. The paper fibers matched a manufacturing run from 1996. And the DNA swab from the backpack straps was a direct match to Margaret Rowe's maternal line. It was Evan's. Claire stood at the evidence table, staring down at the notebook. For the first time in years, the case wasn't cold. A window had opened, however small, and through it leaked the voices of 15 lost children. But windows cut both ways, because if the notebook was real, then so were the last words written inside it. It's back. The counselor's name was Richard Leland. In 1997, he'd been 21, a college student picking up extra money by supervising the 7th grade camping trip. He'd been one of the last adults to see the children alive. Back then, his testimony had seemed straightforward. He claimed he'd gone into town to pick up more supplies, returned to find the camp in disarray, and radioed for help. But 26 years had passed. Now he lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment above a pawn shop on the east side of Austin, his body softened by time, his hair thinned to wisps of gray. His record since then was speckled with odd jobs, short stints in rehab, and one misdemeanor arrest for public intoxication. He was not a man who had prospered. Detective Claire Whitfield and Sergeant Joe Martinez climbed the narrow stairs to his apartment on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. The hallway smelled faintly of fried food and mildew. When they knocked, the door opened after a long pause, revealing Richard squinting into the light, a cigarette trembling in his fingers. "Detectives," he rasped, his voice carrying the hoarseness of someone who'd spent years inhaling smoke. "You're not here about parking tickets?" "No," Claire said simply. "We're here about Lake Wycliffe." The cigarette slipped slightly in his hand. His eyes flickered, then settled into a weary sort of acceptance. He stepped aside, letting them in. The apartment was cramped but tidy. A sagging couch faced a small television, and bookshelves leaned against the walls, heavy with yellowing paperbacks. On the coffee table sat a scatter of cigarette butts in an ashtray, beside a half-empty glass of water. Richard lowered himself into an armchair with the stiffness of someone twice his age. He stubbed out his cigarette and rubbed his temples. "You're reopening it," he said, not a question. "We're following up on new evidence," Claire replied. She placed the photograph of Evan Rowe's notebook on the table between them. Richard's gaze snagged on it. "They found something?" His voice cracked. Claire nodded. A backpack. Buried near the site, Richard's hand twitched toward his mouth, but instead he reached for another cigarette and lit it with a shaking hand. Smoke curled upward in nervous spirals. "I thought about those kids every day," he muttered. "Every single damn day. People think I just forgot, but I didn't. It eats at you, like termites." "Tell us again," Claire said softly. "Everything you remember from that weekend." Richard inhaled deeply, then exhaled, staring at a stain on the carpet as if replaying old film reels in his mind. "It was hot as hell," he began. "June, you know." The kids were loud on the bus, all hyped up. Some of them had never camped before. They set up their tents near the water, built a fire. I tried to keep them in line. You know how 12-year-olds are. Sugar and energy, bouncing off everything. He paused, tapping ash into the tray. Saturday night, they wanted to do ghost stories, so I let them, figured it'd wear them out. We sat around the fire, marshmallows and all. One of the boys, Daniel, I think, told a story about some creature in the woods, tall, with black eyes. The others got spooked. You could see it ripple through them. Martinez shifted, leaning forward. "And you? Did you believe it?" Richard snorted weakly. "I was 21. I believed in beer and girls, not monsters. But they swore they heard things in the trees, branches breaking, whispers. I thought it was just their imagination." He stubbed out his cigarette, lit another. His hands wouldn't stay still. "The next morning the food was running low. Kids eat more than you plan for, so I told them I'd drive into town for supplies. It was supposed to take an hour, maybe 2. When I got back..." His voice faltered. Claire didn't rush him. "When I got back, it was wrong. Too quiet. Tents half open, food on the ground. No kids. Just gone. Like someone scooped them up. I checked everywhere. The lake, the trail. Nothing. That's when I radioed for help." Claire studied him carefully. His story matched the original statement. but something about his tone, too polished, too practiced, raised a prickle at the back of her neck. "Why didn't you take another counselor with you?" she asked. Richard blinked. "There wasn't one. Just me. The school was cutting corners. They didn't want to pay for more staff." Claire exchanged a glance with Martinez. It was true. The old records confirmed Richard had been the only adult on site. Still, something gnawed at her. "What about the claw marks?" Martinez pressed. "You saw them too, right?" Richard's cigarette froze halfway to his lips. His eyes darted to the window, then back. "Yeah," he whispered. "I saw them. But I don't talk about that. People think you're crazy. Tell us anyway." Richard swallowed hard. His hand shook so badly he had to set the cigarette down. "They weren't from any animal I know. I grew up hunting. I know what bear claws look like, or bobcats. These were longer, human, almost. Fingernails, but deeper, like the bark didn't stand a chance. Some went higher than my head. I kept thinking, how the hell does a 12-year-old reach that high?" His voice cracked, and for the first time, Claire believed she was seeing raw memory, not a rehearsed script. The interview stretched on for an hour. They pressed him about the timeline, about whether he had seen cars near the site, about the condition of the buses. Richard answered, but his details wavered. Some too sharp, others oddly blurred. Trauma? Claire thought. Or guilt. When they finally stood to leave, Richard gripped the edge of the armchair with white knuckles. "You think they're dead, don't you?" he asked hoarsely. Claire paused at the door. "We don't know." "Not yet," Richard gave a humorless laugh. "You'll never find bodies, because there aren't any." "Not the way you think," Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" He shook his head quickly, retreating into himself. "Forget it, just old ghosts talking." But as she and Martinez descended the stairs, Claire's mind replayed his words. The way his voice had dropped into something close to fear. "Not the way you think." That night back in her apartment, Claire couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, notebook open, sketching timelines and connections. 15 children, 1 counselor, 2 buses, a lake that seemed to devour sound. She thought about Richard's mention of the story around the campfire. A tall creature with black eyes. Kids swearing they heard whispers in the trees. She flipped open the file on Evan Rowe. His notebook entries, childish doodles of tents and fishing poles, and then the final line. "It's back. It's outside the tents. Don't make a sound. It's back." The phrasing gnawed at her. Not something is outside, but it's back. As though the children knew whatever it was, had seen it before. She wrote the words slowly across her own notebook page, underlining them twice. 2 days later, the department received a call from a retired deputy who had worked the original case. His voice shook with age as he left a message. "I shouldn't be telling you this. We were told to keep it quiet, but there was something they never put in the reports. Something we found at the lake." The message ended abruptly, the line going dead. When Claire tried to call back, no one answered. The retired deputy's name was Samuel Grady. Claire tracked him down through an old personnel directory, the kind printed on yellowing paper long before the department digitized its records. His address led her an hour west of Austin, to a small ranch house at the edge of a dried-up cotton field. The porch sagged under the weight of years, paint peeling in strips. A windmill creaked in the distance, spinning slowly against a flat sky. She parked out front, gravel crunching beneath her tires, and checked the mailbox. Grady, S faded, but still legible. As she climbed the porch steps, the screen door squealed open from inside. An old man appeared, stooped but tall, his frame wiry, shoulders still squared in a way that spoke of long years in uniform. His eyes, though clouded with age, held a sharpness that time hadn't erased. "You're Whitfield," he said without preamble. "I am," she replied. Detective Claire Whitfield. This is Sergeant Martinez. Grady nodded curtly, motioning them inside. The interior of the house was dim, blinds drawn to keep the heat out. The living room smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. Mounted deer antlers hung above the mantel, and a stack of newspapers sat beside an old recliner. Grady lowered himself into the chair with a grunt, gesturing for them to sit on the couch opposite. His hands trembled faintly as he reached for a glass of water. "You got my message," he said. "Yes," Claire said. "You said there was something left out of the reports." Grady stared into his glass for a long moment before speaking. His voice, though shaky, carried weight. "They told us not to talk. Not to write it down, said it'd just cause hysteria. But I've been carrying it for 26 years, and I'll be damned if I take it to my grave." Martinez leaned forward. "What was it?" Grady's gaze lifted, pinning them both. "We found something at the lake. Not bodies, not footprints. Something else." He described the second day of the search, when helicopters thundered overhead and dogs strained at their leashes. Grady and 2 other deputies had been assigned to comb the shoreline near the north end of Lake Wycliffe. "We came across this old drainage pipe," he said. "Rusty thing, sticking out of the bank. Big enough for a man to crawl into, if he was stupid enough. The dogs went nuts around it, whining, scratching at the mud. So we shined our flashlights inside." He paused, swallowing hard. "The walls were covered in drawings." Claire felt the air shift. "Drawings?" Grady nodded. "Scratches. Dozens of them. Some shallow, some carved deep. Kids' drawings, stick figures, houses, trees, names. God help me, some of the names match the missing kids. Evan, Marisol, Jonah, all carved in their own little handwriting, like they were down there, leaving proof they existed." His hand trembled on the armrest. "But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was the faces." "What faces?" Martinez asked. "There were figures carved into the pipe. Tall ones, always taller than the stick kids. Long arms, circles for heads, but no eyes, just hollows. Over and over again, scratched until the metal flaked. Like the kids saw something and tried to put it on the walls. The room seemed to darken around his words." Claire's stomach turned cold. "What happened to the pipe?" she asked. "They sealed it," Grady said flatly. "County ordered it filled with concrete. Claimed it was unstable, a safety hazard. Told us not to mention what we saw, and the other deputies who were there. One died a few years back. Heart attack. The other moved to Arizona. Never talks about it." Grady's voice dropped. "But I remember. Every damn night I see those carvings in my sleep." Silence hung heavy. Claire felt the weight of the revelation pressing down, reshaping everything she thought she knew about the case. The official narrative had always been that the children vanished without a trace, but there had been a trace. Multiple traces, hidden away. "You're sure it was their handwriting?" she asked carefully. Grady's eyes narrowed. "You've seen a kid scratch their name into a desk, or a tree trunk behind the schoolyard. You know it when you see it. It was theirs." "No doubt in my mind," Martinez muttered a curse under his breath. "Why now?" Claire pressed. "Why tell us after all these years?" Grady's jaw tightened. "Because I saw on the news you found something. A backpack. If more is coming out, then maybe it's time the truth comes out too. Those families deserve to know what was hidden from them." Claire nodded slowly. She could feel the shape of the case shifting under her feet, like ground softening before a collapse. When they left the ranch house, the sun was sinking low, painting the fields in long shadows. Martinez was quiet until they reached the car. Then he turned to Claire, his face set. "You believe him?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. Martinez exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Then that means the kids were alive after the first night. Alive long enough to carve names, drawings, faces. That changes everything." Claire didn't answer. Her mind was already racing ahead. The sealed drainage pipe, buried evidence, the possibility of 15 children trapped underground, scratching messages in the dark. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. If the notebook had surfaced, and if Grady was finally breaking his silence, then maybe the case itself was resurfacing, like something long buried clawing its way back into daylight. That night, she pulled the old case files from storage. Dust rose in the evidence room as she spread the boxes across a table, flipping through brittle pages and Polaroid photos. Photos of the camp, overturned tents, half-burned logs, claw marks in the bark. Grainy shots of the buses, handwritten statements from parents, frantic and fragmented. She searched for any mention of the drainage pipe. There was none, not a word. The reports had been scrubbed clean, but in one photo, a wide shot of the lakefront, she noticed a faint, rust-colored shape protruding from the bank. Barely visible, easy to miss, but there, the pipe. Her pulse quickened. At midnight, Claire drove back to Lake Wycliffe alone. The air was thick with humidity, the sky overcast. She parked by the ranger station and walked the trail with a flashlight, her boots crunching softly on the dirt. The forest was alive with sound, crickets, the distant croak of frogs, but the deeper she went, the more it seemed to muffle, as though the trees themselves were swallowing the noise. She reached the shoreline where the photo had been taken decades earlier. Her beam swept across mud and reeds, then froze on a mound of concrete jutting from the bank. Cracked, weather-stained, but unmistakable. She crouched beside it, running her hand over the surface. Faint scratches marred the concrete, though weather had worn them almost smooth. Still, in the right angle of light, she thought she could see grooves, circles, lines, the ghost of carvings beneath the seal. Her breath caught. Behind her, a twig snapped. Claire spun, flashlight jerking across the trees. The beam revealed nothing but trunks and shadows. The forest loomed silent, watchful. Her heart thudded. She waited, breath shallow, until the silence pressed too heavy to bear. Then she forced herself to turn back, snapping a photo of the concrete before retreating up the trail. Even when she reached her car, the sense of eyes on her back did not leave. By morning, Claire had barely slept. Images of concrete scratched with ghostly circles kept dragging her awake. She sat at her kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, the photo of the sealed pipe glowing faintly on her phone screen. There was no way around it. The pipe had to be opened. But first, she needed leverage. No judge would sign a warrant based on the word of a retired deputy and some faint grooves in concrete. She had to build a case carefully, brick by brick. She started with the families. The first call was to Linda Salazar, mother of Marisol. Linda still lived in the same modest house near Burnett, a single story with pale blue siding and a garden overrun with weeds. When Claire arrived, Linda greeted her at the door with wary eyes, her hair pulled back in a fraying braid. "You're with the task force?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Detective Whitfield. I'd like to ask you about Marisol." They sat in the living room, where framed school photos lined the mantel. Marisol's portrait was still there, gap-toothed smile, hair tied with ribbons, her eyes bright with mischief. Linda's voice shook as she spoke. She loved to draw. Couldn't stop doodling. Paper walls, even the back of the cereal box. She'd write her name over and over in curly letters, like she wanted the whole world to remember it. Claire leaned forward. "Do you think she would have carved her name if she was scared?" Linda blinked, her lip trembling. Why do you ask me that?" Claire hesitated. She couldn't reveal everything. Not yet. We're exploring all possibilities. Even small details matter. Tears welled in Linda's eyes. If she thought it would help someone find her, yes. She would have written her name. She wanted to be seen. The words sank heavy. Confirmation, in a way, of what Grady had described. Later that day, Claire met with another parent, Thomas Ackerman, father of Jonah. He was a quiet man, weathered by years of labor, his eyes hollowed by grief that had never softened. They spoke on his porch as he smoked a cigarette, ash drifting into the wind. Jonah was a dreamer, Thomas said, always drawing monsters. Long arms, no eyes. Said they lived in the woods near camp. I told him it was just imagination. Now, his voice cracked. Now I wonder if he knew something even then. Claire's breath caught. Monsters with no eyes. The same images Grady described in the pipe. Her case was building. That evening, she met Martinez at the precinct. He was poring over aerial photos of Lake Wycliffe, spread across a table like a war map. I checked the county records, he said without looking up. The pipe was officially sealed 2 months after the kids vanished. No mention of drawings, just notes about erosion control, and the order came from where? County Commissioner's office. The signature's long gone. Guy died in 2001, but you know how it works. Someone higher up didn't want the public to know. Claire leaned on the table, staring at the photo of the lake. We need that pipe opened. Martinez raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? Evidence concealment. Possible remains. Possible, he repeated dryly. Claire's jaw tightened. I'll take it to Reyes. If he won't back me, I'll push the DA myself. 2 days later, the warrant came through, barely. Reyes wasn't pleased, but the DA approved a limited excavation for forensic evaluation. The team assembled at dawn by the North Shore. Crime scene technicians, a forensic anthropologist, and a county work crew with a portable generator and jackhammers. The air was heavy with mist, muffling sound, making the world feel distant. Claire stood with Martinez, watching as the crew set up floodlights around the mound of concrete. Once we break this open, there's no going back, Martinez murmured. That's the point, Claire said. The jackhammers roared, echoing across the water. Concrete splintered, chunks falling into the mud. Dust hung in the damp air. Slowly, the pipe's rusted mouth re-emerged, a dark oval yawning from the bank. The smell hit first, faint, metallic, like old coins and mildew. The technicians donned respirators and crawled inside with cameras and evidence kits. Claire waited tensely by the opening, every muscle taut. Minutes passed. Then a voice called out from within. "Detective, you need to see this." She ducked low and stepped inside. The beam of her flashlight swept across corroded metal walls. And there they were. Drawings. Hundreds of them. The children's names scratched over and over. Evan, Jonah, Marisol, Danielle, etched into the steel with desperate hands. Some were neat, some frantic. Lines gouged deep as if the writers pressed until their fingernails broke. Stick figures filled the walls, kids holding hands, houses with square windows, trees with jagged branches, and towering above them, the tall figures, circles for heads, arms dragging to the ground, hollow spaces where eyes should be, some drawn with such violence the metal bent inward. Claire's breath came shallow. "Jesus," Martinez whispered behind her. In the farthest corner, the anthropologist crouched over a pile of debris. Bones, tiny, fragmented, mixed with rust flakes. Not full skeletons, just remnants. Too few to account for 15 children, but enough to prove someone hadn't made it out alive. The silence in the pipe pressed like a weight. Back outside, evidence bags were lined on tarps. Bone fragments, fabric scraps, rusted metal trinkets. One technician held up a small bracelet, plastic beads strung together to spell Marisol. Linda's words echoed in Claire's mind. She wanted the whole world to remember her. Claire's stomach twisted. The case was no longer just a cold file. It was here, bleeding through decades of silence. By late afternoon, the site was cordoned off with yellow tape. Reporters gathered at the trailhead, their cameras flashing. Reyes gave a brief, stiff statement. Evidence of potential criminal concealment has been uncovered. The investigation is ongoing. Claire stayed in the background, though she felt every lens trying to capture her face. As the crowd dispersed, she noticed a man standing alone near the tree line, middle-aged, wearing a cap pulled low, watching. When their eyes met, he turned and slipped into the woods. "Did you see that?" she asked Martinez. He scanned the trees. "See what?" "Never mind." But her skin prickled. That night, Claire dreamed of the pipe. In her dream, she crawled inside alone. The walls were alive, the stick figures shifting, their arms stretching, circling her. Names whispered in the dark, voices of children calling, "We're still here." She woke with a start, sweat chilling her skin. The clock read 3:07 a.m. The case wasn't just reopening. It was consuming her. The media storm broke the next morning. By sunrise, every local channel carried the story. Evidence found in the disappearance of 15 children at Camp Wycliffe, 1994. Aerial shots of the excavation site looped on television screens, yellow tape fluttering in the mist. Anchors spoke in hushed tones, words like remains, concealed evidence, cover-up. Claire watched from the precinct's conference room, the sound muted but the images sharp. On the screen, a reporter pointed to the pipe, her expression grave. Behind her, a work crew hauled out bags of soil and debris, as if dragging the past into daylight. Martinez clicked off the screen. "They'll pick this apart for weeks. Every theory, every rumor. We're about to be buried in it." Claire didn't answer. Her mind was still in the pipe, the names, the drawings, the bracelet. The families arrived at the station in a tide of grief and anger. They filled the lobby. Parents, siblings, even grandparents who had clung to hope for decades. Some demanded answers. Others clutched old photographs like talismans. Claire met them in the community room, where chairs had been set in a circle. She stood at the center, every eye fixed on her. "We uncovered personal effects at the site," she said carefully. "Some items have been linked to your children. We're working with forensic specialists to confirm identities. It will take time." Linda Salazar raised her hand, voice breaking. "The bracelet. Was it Marisol's?" Claire hesitated. She wasn't supposed to release details yet. But Linda's eyes burned with raw desperation. "Yes," Claire said softly. Linda crumpled into sobs, her hands pressed to her mouth. Around the circle, other parents gasped or shook their heads, grief rippling like a wave. Thomas Ackerman spoke next, his tone sharp. "So you're saying they were in that pipe? Alive long enough to carve their names, their drawings?" Claire swallowed hard. "The evidence suggests they were there at some point." "Then why didn't you tell us?" he demanded. "Why did it take 26 years? Martinez stepped in, his voice firm. "Because the records were buried, sealed. We're uncovering the truth now. That's why we're here." But the room was already fracturing. Tears, shouts, accusations tangled in the air. Claire felt their fury and grief sink into her bones. That evening, Claire drove back to the lake. The site was quiet now, floodlights dark, the tape still fluttering. She stood by the pipe, listening to the water lap against the shore. The silence was heavier than the shouting parents, heavier than the cameras. She remembered the man in the woods, the one who had vanished when she locked eyes with him. Something about his posture, the way he lingered. It gnawed at her. She took out her phone and pulled up the original case photos again. Faces of suspects, leads that went nowhere. One man in particular, seen near the camp that weekend, questioned but never charged. His file had only a name, Gerald Lang, a groundskeeper who worked seasonal jobs around Burnett County. The photo was old, grainy, but the jawline and cap looked familiar. The next morning she brought it to Martinez. "You think Lang was the man in the woods?" he asked, skeptical. "I think it's possible." He disappeared from the records after '96. No forwarding address, no job trail. But if he's back, he might know something. Martinez rubbed his temple. Or he's just a drifter who likes watching work crews. Claire's voice hardened. He was on the suspect list, Miguel. He worked at the camp. If the kids were herded toward that pipe, someone led them there. Maybe someone who knew the grounds Martinez sighed. Fine. Let's chase it, but quietly. If the press gets wind we're hunting a groundskeeper, they'll crucify us if it's wrong. They pulled county employment records, searching for Gerald Lang. The last paycheck stub placed him at Camp Wycliffe the summer of '94. After that, nothing but a faded address on the outskirts of Marble Falls. They drove out that afternoon. The house was a sagging shack, swallowed by weeds, windows boarded, mailbox stuffed with yellowed flyers. The porch sagged under the weight of silence. Looks abandoned, Martinez muttered. Claire tried the door. Locked. She circled the property, noting a shed half-collapsed behind the house. Inside, through a crack in the wood, she saw boxes piled high, plastic tubs stacked unevenly. They pried the door open. Dust rose like breath. The boxes were filled with junk. Old tools, rusted cans, yellowed newspapers. But at the bottom of one bin, Claire found something that froze her. A child's shoe. Small, scuffed, with a faded sticker of a rainbow peeling from the side. Martinez knelt, his face grim. Evidence. Claire bagged it carefully, her pulse racing. Evidence. Back at the station, they logged the shoe into evidence. The forensic team would test it for DNA, though after decades, the chances were slim. Still, the discovery tied Lang to children's belongings. Reyes was furious when he heard. "You went to a property without a warrant?" "It was abandoned," Claire countered. "No trespassing signs, no resident. The shed was open. Reyes's glare could have cut steel. You don't get to decide what's open season. You follow procedure. One more step out of line, Whitfield, and I pull you off this case." But Claire saw it in his eyes. The fear. He wasn't just angry at her methods. He was afraid of what they were uncovering. That night, Claire lay awake again. The image of the shoe hovered in her mind. She thought of Marisol's bracelet, the children's names carved in the pipe, the faceless figures looming in the dark. And she thought of Lang, watching from the trees, slipping away before anyone could stop him. Somewhere out there, she knew, the man carried answers. But what if he wasn't the only one? The following week brought another storm. Forensics confirmed the bracelet belonged to Marisol Salazar, matched through old family photos. The bone fragments, though degraded, were consistent with children of the victims' ages. The shoe, too deteriorated for DNA, matched the size worn by Jonah Ackerman at the time. The press went wild. Headlines screamed, "Cover-up at Camp Wycliffe, families betrayed, possible suspect identified." Claire's phone rang non-stop, but one call cut through them all. Linda Salazar again. Her voice was ragged. "They said you found her bracelet." But they won't say what else. "Please, detective, I need to know. Did she die in that pipe?" Claire's throat tightened. "We can't say for certain, but we know she was there." Silence stretched. Then a whisper. "Thank you. At least now I know she left something behind." When the call ended, Claire sat with her head in her hands. The truth was coming out piece by piece, but every truth felt like a wound torn open. That evening, as she left the station, she noticed a slip of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. Her heart skipped. She unfolded it. The message was scrawled in shaky block letters. "Stop digging. They never left." The note sat on Claire's kitchen counter all night, its block letters burning into her thoughts. Stop digging. They never left. She had bagged it in evidence, of course, but she couldn't shake the feeling that whoever wrote it wanted her, specifically, to read it in the dark silence of her home. The words felt less like a warning than a verdict. By morning, she was strung tight from lack of sleep. Martinez noticed as soon as she walked into the precinct. "You look like hell," he said, sliding a cup of coffee across the table. "Thanks," Claire muttered, taking it. "You want to tell me what's eating you?" She hesitated, then handed him the photo of the note. His brow furrowed as he read. "Someone's watching you," he said flatly. "Someone's been watching the whole time," Claire corrected. Reyes convened an emergency meeting that afternoon. The note had been photographed and analyzed. Cheap lined notebook paper, black marker, no fingerprints. Useless. "This is intimidation," Reyes said, pacing the room. "Classic tactic to rattle investigators. We do not let it derail the case." Claire's jaw clenched. "Or it's someone close to the case, someone who knows what we're finding." Reyes gave her a hard look. "You don't know that." "I know they're nervous enough to warn us off." Martinez broke the tension. "What about the wording?" "They never left." "What the hell does that mean?" No one answered. The silence was heavier than denial. The next step was canvassing. Claire and Martinez split the list of names: former camp staff, maintenance workers, cooks, counselors. Many had moved on, changed jobs, disappeared into the fabric of other lives. Claire drove to a retirement home in Burnett to find Elaine Morgan, the camp nurse in '94. Elaine was frail now, her hair thin and white, her eyes watery but alert. When Claire asked about the night the children vanished, Elaine's hands trembled on her walker. "They were sick," she whispered. "Several of them. Headaches, nausea. They came to me after dinner. I gave them water, told them to rest. Do you remember what they ate?" Elaine shook her head. "Burgers, maybe. It was cookout night. But they all complained the meat tasted strange. I thought it was undercooked. Now I wonder." Her voice trailed off. Claire leaned in. "Did you report it?" "I tried," Elaine said softly. "But the deputies told me to keep quiet. Said it would just confuse people, that the kids had run off. But I know what I saw. They were sick. Something was in their food." Claire's stomach twisted. Poison? Sedatives? It would explain how 15 children could be subdued at once. But it also meant someone at the camp had prepared it. Martinez's interviews turned up something too. A former maintenance worker recalled Gerald Lang arguing with the camp director the day before the kids vanished. He said Lang was furious about unpaid wages and kept muttering, "They'll remember me." Lang again. Always Lang. Claire pinned his faded photo to the evidence board, a grainy mugshot from a trespassing arrest in '92. The eyes were shadowed, the jaw clenched, the brim of a cap tilted low. He was becoming less of a ghost and more of a shadow that stretched across every discovery. That night, Claire sat at her dining table with the case files spread before her. She flipped through Polaroids of the campsite, the torn tents, the abandoned shoes, the claw marks on trees. She paused at one photo she had skimmed before, a wide shot of the dining hall. In the corner of the frame, just barely visible through a window, stood a man in a cap. Her pulse spiked. She enlarged the photo with her phone, zooming until the pixels blurred. The jawline was familiar. The cap, Lang, watching. The next morning, Claire and Martinez returned to the shack outside Marble Falls, this time with a warrant. Deputies pried open the door while technicians photographed every corner. Dust hung thick, cobwebs strung like netting. In the bedroom, they found a mattress stained dark with age, the springs exposed. Beneath it, tucked into the frame, lay a bundle wrapped in plastic. Claire slid it open with gloves. Inside were photographs, faded Polaroids of children at camp. Not just posed group shots, but candid ones. Kids lining up for dinner, kids at the lake, kids asleep in tents. And in the margin of several, names were scrawled in shaky handwriting. Evan, Jonah, Marisol. Claire's chest tightened. He was watching them. Cataloging them, Martinez muttered a curse under his breath. The Polaroids went straight to forensics. The shoe, the bracelet, the photos. It was enough to justify a manhunt. Reyes finally caved, issuing a warrant for Gerald Lang's arrest on suspicion of kidnapping, murder, and evidence tampering. But Lang was still a ghost. No driver's license renewals, no employment records, no bank activity. It was as if he'd been living off the grid for decades. Someone like that doesn't just disappear, Martinez said. He's surviving somewhere. Someone's helping him. Claire nodded grimly. Then we find who. That evening, as Claire left the station, she noticed her porch light glowing when she pulled into her driveway. She hadn't left it on. Her hand hovered near her gun as she approached. The door was locked, the windows shut. She stepped inside cautiously, heart thudding. On the kitchen counter lay a new note. No envelope, no fingerprints. Just the same block letters as before. You're getting too close. Next time, it's your name on the wall. The second note shook Claire more than she wanted to admit. She'd faced threats before. Drug dealers, gang enforcers, desperate suspects who spit warnings through gritted teeth. But this was different. This wasn't bluster in the heat of arrest. This was cold, calculated. Someone had been inside her house, close enough to leave a message on her kitchen counter without a trace. The thought gnawed at her as she sat in the precinct's briefing room the next morning. The walls were plastered with photographs now, children's faces, crime scene shots, Lang's grainy mugshot, and the pipe that had changed everything. Reyes paced at the front, voice sharp. Lang is officially our priority. He's been off the grid for nearly 3 decades, but someone like that doesn't vanish without help. He'll have contacts, old employers, family, maybe sympathetic townsfolk. We start there. Martinez leaned toward Claire, whispering, "You tell him about the note?" Claire shook her head. She didn't want to hand Reyes more ammunition to sideline her. Not yet. The task force split into teams. Claire and Martinez took the angle of family. Lang's file listed a younger sister, Carol, last known address in Llano. They drove west, the landscape flattening into scrub and limestone. Carol's house was a modest ranch style, paint peeling but the yard neatly kept. She answered the door with wary eyes, hair streaked with gray, a cigarette dangling from her fingers. "You're here about Gerald," she said, not bothering to ask. "Yes," Claire said. "We need to know if you've had contact with him." Carol exhaled smoke, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "Haven't seen him since '98. Not really. He called once, collect, from somewhere in Arkansas. Said he couldn't come home. Said they'd never let him." That was the last time Martinez's brow furrowed. They? Who did he mean? Carol's lips pressed thin. He didn't say. But he sounded different, paranoid. Said the woods weren't safe anymore. Said the kids were still out there, whispering. Claire's pulse quickened. "Whispering?" Carol nodded faintly, as though repeating words she'd tried to forget. He said they never left. That he could hear them every night driving back. The silence in the car was thick. Finally, Martinez muttered, "If she's telling the truth, he's not just hiding. He's unraveling, or he knows something no one else does." Claire said. Her thoughts returned to the notes left in her home. The phrasing matched what Carol described. They never left. The connection was undeniable, which meant Lang wasn't just sending threats. He was taunting her with his truth. That night, Claire returned home with her service weapon drawn before she even unlocked the door. She swept the rooms, checking every shadow, every closet. Nothing. But she couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. She taped the latest note to her fridge, right beside the first. A grim reminder and a promise to herself. She wouldn't back down. Still, sleep came in fragments. She woke to imagined whispers, to the creak of floorboards settling. Once, she swore she heard children's laughter faintly in the hall, but when she snapped on the light, the air was empty. By dawn, she sat at her kitchen table again, clutching cold coffee, eyes gritty. The notes loomed behind her like twin specters. The manhunt gained traction quickly. Tips flooded in, half of them crackpot sightings, the other half dead ends. Lang had become a ghost story. He was the tall man in gas stations, the shadow near campgrounds, the stranger at the edge of town. But one call stood out. A store clerk in Johnson City reported a man who matched Lang's description buying canned goods and batteries late at night. Paid in cash. Kept his cap pulled low. When asked if he wanted a bag, he'd said, "Don't need one. Won't be staying long." The clerk swore he drove off in an old, rusted pickup, plates obscured by mud. Claire and Martinez drove out immediately. The clerk repeated the story in detail, even sketching the truck. It was enough to canvass the area. Deputies combed the back roads, but the truck was gone. Still, it was the first real sighting in years. "He's circling the lake," Martinez said grimly as they drove back. "Like he can't stay away." Claire nodded. "It's where it all started. Where it all ended. Maybe it's the only place he feels in control. Or maybe," she thought, "it's where he's keeping them." The next day, Claire received a package at the precinct. No return address, just her name in block letters. She opened it carefully, gloved hands steady. Inside was a Polaroid. The photo was of the pipe, taken recently, and scrawled across the bottom margin in the same handwriting as the notes, "Listen closely, they're still speaking." The photo was logged into evidence, but Claire kept a copy at her desk. She stared at it for hours, her mind spiraling. Were the notes a warning, a threat, or an invitation? She thought of the children's names carved into the pipe, of the stick figures and faceless things. She thought of their parents, waiting decades for answers that never came. The case wasn't just about solving a crime anymore. It was about untangling something deeper, something that blurred the line between memory, myth, and horror. She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion pressing at her temples. For the first time, she wondered if the children had ever truly left those woods, or if some part of them still lingered, whispering, waiting. That night, her phone rang at 2:13 a.m. She answered on the second ring, voice hoarse. "Whitfield." Static filled the line. Then a child's voice, faint but clear, whispered, "Don't make a sound." The line went dead. The phone still buzzed faintly in Claire's hand, the silence on the line thicker than any words. She lowered it slowly, her heart hammering. The voice hadn't been distorted like an adult faking a child. It carried the soft cadence, the fragile tremor of real youth. "Don't make a sound." The same words written in Evan Rowe's notebook 26 years ago. Claire sat frozen at her kitchen table, the glow of the streetlight bleeding through her blinds. She replayed the moment again and again, testing it against reason. Could someone have sampled an old recording, manipulated it, or was it something worse? Something impossible. At 2:20 a.m., she grabbed her coat and drove to the precinct. Martinez was already there. He lived close enough that her frantic call had roused him. He looked rumpled, his shirt half-buttoned, but his eyes sharpened when she told him. "A child's voice?" he repeated. "Yes," Claire said. Whispered the same thing that was in the notebook. The exact words. Martinez rubbed his jaw. "Lang. Has to be. He's toying with you, trying to break you down." Claire paced the briefing room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "Then how does he have a child's voice?" Unless he recorded them back then. The thought chilled her. Recordings. Children whispering in the dark, their fear captured forever on the tape. "Let's pull the call log," Martinez said. "See where it came from." The tech team traced it within the hour. No caller ID, no number, but the ping came from a cell tower near Lake Wycliffe. Claire felt the hair on her arms rise. Of course, always the lake. She and Martinez drove out before dawn. The roads were empty, the world hushed. Mist clung to the trees, the kind of morning where sound carried strange. They parked by the ranger station, headlights cutting through fog. The forest loomed like a cathedral, dark trunks rising like pillars. Claire checked her service weapon, her flashlight, the photo of the pipe. If he's out here, we'll find him. Martinez's mouth tightened, or he's waiting for us. They followed the shoreline path, boots sinking into damp earth. The lake was a black mirror, still and silent. Halfway down the trail, Claire froze. A payphone stood in the clearing. She blinked, thinking her eyes were playing tricks. But no, it was real. Rusted, the paint peeling but standing upright in the mud. A receiver dangled from the cord, swaying slightly as if it had just been dropped. "Jesus," Martinez muttered. "Out here." Claire approached slowly. The payphone was coated in dew, the numbers worn smooth. Taped to the side was a Polaroid. She peeled it free with gloved hands. It showed the campsite from '94, tents, campfire, logs. And in the corner, half hidden by shadow, the faint outline of a child. The name scrawled beneath, Evan. Her pulse thundered. "He's staging this." Martinez scanned the tree line, his hand hovering near his gun. "If Lang put this here, he's close." The woods pressed silent around them. Not even a bird call. Claire stared at the Polaroid again. The child in the corner. Was it really there, or just a trick of light? The longer she looked, the less certain she became. Back at the precinct, the Polaroid was logged and analyzed. Forensics couldn't date it precisely, but the film type matched Polaroids manufactured in the early '90s. Could be authentic, the lab tech said. Could also be someone stockpiled old film. Can't say for sure. Reyes wasn't satisfied. He slammed the report down in frustration. "We can't chase ghosts. We need hard evidence that Lang is alive, breathing, and taunting us." Claire clenched her jaw. "Then let me keep pressing. He's circling the lake, leaving these trails. He wants me to follow, or he wants to bury you in it." Reyes shot back. That evening, Claire sat in her car outside Linda Salazar's house. She hadn't planned to stop, but something in her chest pulled her there. Linda answered the door with swollen eyes. She'd seen the news, the bracelet, the Polaroid. She knew enough to understand the weight pressing on the investigation. "You look haunted," Linda said softly. Claire gave a tired laugh. "That's because I am." Linda invited her in. The living room smelled faintly of candles and lavender. On the wall hung Marisol's drawings, framed like artifacts. Bright, childlike colors of houses, flowers, suns with smiling faces. "She used to whisper when she was scared," Linda said, brushing her fingers across one frame. "Not scream, just whisper. Like she thought if she kept quiet, the monsters wouldn't hear." Claire's throat tightened. "The phone call. Don't make a sound." Linda turned, her gaze sharp. "Detective, do you ever wonder if they're still trying to reach us?" "From wherever they are." Claire had no answer. Driving home, she thought about Linda's words, about whispers carrying across time, from pipe walls to telephones to her own ears. Her headlights carved through the dark, illuminating trees that loomed like sentinels. For a moment, she swore she saw movement at the edge of the road. A figure, tall and still, watching. When she slammed the brakes and swung the beam back, the shoulder was empty. Her pulse hammered, her breath shallow. She drove the rest of the way with her gun on the passenger seat. That night, another call came. 2:41 a.m. The same static hiss, the same fragile voice. But this time, it spoke more. "Don't follow." "It's here." Claire sat rigid, the phone pressed to her ear, her hand shaking. "Who is this?" she whispered. "Evan?" "Marisol. Who's speaking?" Static swallowed the line. Then, faintly, another sound. A scrape, like fingernails dragging across metal. The same sound Grady had described in the pipe. Then silence. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she returned to the lake alone. Mist rolled across the surface, the trees heavy with dew. She walked the trail slowly, listening, waiting. Every step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the pipe, she crouched low, staring into the darkness. The concrete edges were cracked from the excavation. The tunnel yawned black, swallowing light. For a moment, she swore she heard it again, the faint, desperate scrape of fingernails on metal. Her skin prickled, her chest tight, and then clear as breath against her ear. "Detective!" The word clung to Claire's ear like a phantom breath. "Detective!" She jerked back from the pipe, her boots sliding in the mud. The forest was utterly still, the lake glass flat. There was no one there. No footprints in the damp earth except her own. She held her breath, straining to listen. Nothing. Only the low hum of the wind stirring through the pines. Her rational mind scrambled for footing. It could have been her imagination, the echo of her own thoughts. Or worse. Lang, crouched somewhere inside that tunnel, speaking in a child's cadence to disorient her. Still, her heart hammered with a primitive terror she couldn't reason away. She pulled her flashlight, shining it deep into the pipe. The beam disappeared into darkness after 30 feet. The concrete walls glistened with moisture. "Hello?" she called, her voice steady but her throat dry. The sound reverberated back in hollow distortion. No answer. She crouched, ran gloved fingers across the tunnel lip. Dirt, moss, a broken beer bottle. But there, near the edge, fresh scratches, thin lines etched into the concrete, parallel and jagged, as though made by fingernails dragged in desperation. Claire's stomach turned. She snapped photos with her phone, trying to ignore the tightening in her chest. By the time she returned to the precinct, Martinez was pacing. "You went alone?" His voice cracked with disbelief. Claire placed the photos on the table. "I had to. They're escalating." "Look." He studied the scratches, his brow furrowing. "Could be anything. Kids messing around." "No!" Claire snapped. "They're recent." 2 fresh Reyes entered then, coffee in hand, his expression thunderous. "You two need to get your head straight. This case is turning into a circus. Payphones in the woods, ghost voices on the line. You're letting him play you." Claire bristled. "What if it isn't a game? What if the kids—" "They're dead," Reyes cut her off sharply. "And the sooner you accept that, the better chance you'll have of catching the bastard who killed them." His words dropped like stones. But that night, Claire couldn't let it go. She sat at her dining table with the bracelet, the Polaroid, the photo of the scratches. Around her, the room seemed too quiet, every creak of the house amplified. She played back the recordings from the phone traces. Static, hiss, faint whispers. Over and over, she leaned closer, headphones pressed tight, desperate to catch something new. At 2:12 a.m., she froze. In the background of one call, almost inaudible, was a faint splashing, like water lapping against stone. The lake. She replayed it until her ears ached, convinced now the calls weren't made from some distant cell spoof. They were coming from the shoreline itself. By morning, she drove back out with Martinez, though she didn't tell him what she'd heard. He'd only say it was her imagination. The mist was lifting as they arrived. Claire scanned the shoreline, her eyes sharp. The ranger station, the payphone clearing, the crooked trees bending over the water. Then she spotted it. Half buried in sand near the lake's edge, the twisted shape of a cassette tape. She pulled it free, waterlogged but intact. The label, faded but legible, read simply, Camp 94. Martinez frowned. "That's planted. Has to be Claire pocketed it. Or it's evidence." The precinct still had an old player in evidence storage. She sat alone in the soundproof room, placed the cassette inside, and pressed play. Static hissed. A long stretch of silence, then faint voices. Children. They were singing. A campfire song, off-key but joyful, laughter spilling between lines. Claire's breath caught. It was so ordinary, so alive. Then, abruptly, the tape cut. A muffled cry, a man's voice, low and commanding. "Quiet, don't make a sound." The same phrase again, the same haunting directive. The recording ended there, the tape clicking as it spun out. Claire's hands shook as she removed it. Proof, not of survival, but of the moment fear descended. When Reyes heard it, his face paled. For the first time, his certainty cracked. "Where did you find this?" "Lake Shoreline," Claire said. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "We'll send it for analysis." Voice match, tape dating, all of it. "But I don't like where this is heading." "Heading where?" Martinez asked. Reyes's eyes were grim. "Toward obsession. Whoever left this, they want you pulled under, drowning in this case. If you're not careful, detective, you'll vanish into it the same way those kids did." Claire thought about that on the drive home. The tape still echoed in her mind. The laughter, the shift to terror, the command for silence. She parked outside her house, sat in the car long after the engine cut. Her reflection stared back from the window, pale and strained. A movement flickered at the edge of the glass. She turned. On her porch sat a shoebox. Her chest seized. She approached slowly, her gun drawn. The box was damp with dew, a crude bow tied around it. Inside were 12 Polaroids. Each showed a different tent, numbered in black marker. Tent 1, Tent 2, Tent 3. And in Tent 4, the shadow of a man bending over a child. Claire's stomach lurched. She staggered back, bile rising in her throat. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A new message, unknown number, a single word. Closer. The word haunted her. Closer. It echoed in Claire's mind as the evidence team dusted the shoebox and Polaroids on her porch. Neighbors leaned over fences, whispering, watching the flashing squad lights. She stood apart, arms folded tightly, forcing herself not to tremble. Reyes was the last to arrive. His face was carved from stone as he flipped through the photographs beneath the forensic lamp. "These aren't just pictures," he said. "They're staging." He's reenacting the camp. Tent by tent, Claire forced her voice steady. "And in number 4, he shows himself." "Maybe," Reyes said, squinting at the shadow. "Or maybe he wants us to think that." He shut the folder with a snap. "Effective either way." "He's in your head, Whitfield." "That's what he wants." Claire didn't answer. She already knew Lang was further inside her head than she dared admit. That night, the Polaroids burned in her thoughts. She couldn't stay in her house. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every rustle outside a presence watching. She drove. The streets blurred past. Neon gas stations, the glow of 24-hour diners. Her hands gripped the wheel too tightly. She told herself she was just clearing her head. But her path was no accident. She was heading back to the lake. The forest greeted her with silence when she arrived near midnight. She parked on the dirt shoulder, killed the engine, and let the night swallow her. Her flashlight beam cut through the trees. Dew clung to the branches, silver in the pale moonlight. She followed the trail toward the water, toward the place she couldn't stop circling back to. And then, there it was. Tent stakes in the dirt. Rusted, bent, but arranged deliberately in a square. She crouched, fingers brushing the earth. They hadn't been there earlier. A whisper stirred behind her. "Detective!" She spun, gun drawn, beam cutting through the trees. Nothing, only shadows stretching long and thin. But the air carried it. A voice, faint and taunting, threaded through the rustle of leaves. "Closer!" The next morning, Martinez found her at the precinct, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking around a styrofoam cup of coffee. "You didn't sleep." Claire gave a humorless laugh. "Who could?" "You can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "You're chasing phantoms. He wants you exhausted. He wants you doubting yourself." She stared at him, searching for anger, but finding only concern. "You believe me, though," she said softly. Martinez hesitated. "I believe something's happening. But whether it's Lang or just—" "Just what?" she snapped. "Me losing it?" He didn't answer. Reyes called them into his office before noon. "The tape analysis came back," he said without preamble. "Recorded on late 80s stock. Authentic. The voice, no clean match in CODIS, but definitely male, mid-30s to 40s at the time, which puts Lang squarely in the frame." He slid a report across the desk. "And those Polaroids?" "The film expired in 95, meaning whoever staged them kept it all these years." Claire's throat tightened. "He's been planning this." "Or holding on to souvenirs," Reyes said. "Either way, he wants to drag us through his memories. But it's not just about the past. He's here now." Watching the implication was clear. Claire wasn't just hunting Lang. He was hunting her. That evening, she stopped at her mother's house, a place she rarely visited. The porch light was dim, the siding weathered. Her mother opened the door with wary eyes. "Claire, it's late. I just needed to see you." Inside, the house smelled of lavender and dust. They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from mugs of tea. Her mother studied her carefully. "You've got that look again. Same one you had after the Caldwell case." Haunted Claire forced a smile. "This is different. Because of the kids?" Claire nodded. The words spilled out then, about the notes, the photographs, the voices that seemed to follow her everywhere. Her mother listened in silence, her face drawn. When Claire finished, her mother reached across the table, her hands rough and warm. "You can't carry all their ghosts, baby. Some of them don't want saving." Claire swallowed hard. "But if it were me? If I vanished? Wouldn't you want someone to keep looking, no matter how long?" Her mother's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Of course I would." 2 nights later, the storm hit. Rain lashed against her windows, thunder rolling over the city. Claire lay on the couch, unable to face her bedroom. The bracelet lay on the coffee table, gleaming in flashes of lightning. A knock jolted her upright. She froze. Another knock, soft, deliberate. Gun in hand, she edged to the door, peering through the peephole. No one. She opened it slowly, and there, hanging from the doorknob, was another Polaroid. This one showed her house. Tonight. The storm caught mid-flash. Her knees weakened. He'd been here again, close enough to snap the shot, close enough to watch her. She scanned the street, but the rain swallowed everything. On the back of the photo, scrawled in black ink, "Almost." The word on the Polaroid's back seared itself into Claire's mind. Almost. She stared at it long after the evidence team had bagged it, long after Martinez drove her home and insisted on checking every window and lock himself. Almost what? Almost caught? Almost over? Or almost hers? Sleep was impossible. Every tick of the clock was a countdown she couldn't decipher. She kept circling back to the lake in her mind, the pipe, the tents, the whispers. That place was a magnet, and Lang was pulling the string tighter. By dawn, she knew she couldn't wait for him to strike again. She had to go to him. The rain had washed the forest clean, leaving the air sharp with pine and wet earth. Claire parked on the gravel turnout, where the trail into the old camp began. The place had been fenced off for years, but the gate now hung twisted and broken, as though something or someone had ripped it wide open. She stepped through, her boots sinking into soft mud. The forest swallowed her whole. The camp appeared gradually like bones surfacing from shallow earth. collapsed cabins, roofs sagging under decades of rot, rusted swings creaking in the breeze, a flagpole leaning like a broken mast. She moved slowly, gun drawn, every step deliberate. Her flashlight beam cut arcs through the fog, pooling low to the ground. The silence was suffocating. A sound cracked through it, a single metallic bang. Claire froze. It came again, rhythmic. From the mess hall, its windows boarded, doors chained. She approached cautiously. The chain rattled in the wind, knocking against the door frame. And then she saw it. Pinned to the chain with a nail was another Polaroid. This one showed her, standing at the pipe, from behind. Her skin prickled. He wasn't just luring her here. He'd been here, watching, close enough to record her every move. She forced her breathing steady and pulled the photo free. On the back, in that same jagged hand, inside, the lock gave easily under her bolt cutter. The door groaned as she pushed inside. The mess hall smelled of mold and rust. Tables overturned, chairs broken, dust thick on the floor. In the center, a single lantern flickered. Its light fell on 12 sleeping bags arranged in a circle. Each one held a mannequin. Child-sized, dressed in vintage camp uniforms. Claire's stomach turned. She edged closer, flashlight shaking as it passed over their painted faces, their glassy eyes. One had a cracked cheek, another a missing hand. Pinned to each uniform was a name tag. She read them aloud in a whisper. Jacob, Emily, Sarah, all 12 names, the missing kids. Her chest tightened. The scene was obscene, a twisted shrine. Then, from the shadows, detective. She spun. Lang stood at the far end of the hall. His beard was wild, his clothes filthy, but his eyes burned with sharp, unsettling clarity. He smiled faintly. You finally came. Her gun locked on him, hands where I can see them. He raised them slowly, palms outward. You've been listening. Good. That's the only way to hear them. Lie on the ground, Lang. He chuckled softly. Still pretending this is about me. It never was now. But he didn't move. His voice deepened, almost reverent. They never left this place. Not really. Their laughter, their fear, it soaked into the ground, into the walls. You've heard it. I know you have Claire's hand tightened on the trigger. Where are the kids, Lang? They're here, he whispered. He gestured to the mannequins. Can't you see? Rage surged in her chest. You sick bastard. But then a sound stopped her cold. A child's laugh. It rang from the dark corner of the hall, high and light. Unmistakable. Claire's heart seized. She swung her flashlight toward it. Nothing but shadows. Lang's smile widened. You hear them too. The laugh came again. Then another, overlapping. Faint but real, threading through the stale air. Claire's mind warred with itself. It couldn't be. Recordings, tricks of acoustics. But the sound drilled into her, raw and undeniable. Stop it, she shouted, her voice breaking. Lang took a step closer. They want to be found, but they don't trust the others, only you. Her gun trembled in her hands. Every fiber of her training screamed to shoot, to end this, but her legs felt rooted, her breath ragged. Lang lowered his arms, slowly. His eyes locked on hers. Closer, he whispered. The same word, the same command she'd heard in the night. Martinez's voice shattered the spell. Claire! She turned. He stood in the doorway with 2 deputies, weapons raised. In that instant, Lang lunged for the back exit. Stop! Claire fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet tore into the wall, inches from his shoulder. Lang vanished through the door, into the trees. Martinez grabbed her arm. You all right? Jesus, Whitfield, you were just standing there. Claire shook him off, chest heaving. We can't let him get away. But already the forest had swallowed Lang whole. Only the echo of children's laughter lingered, drifting like smoke through the ruined camp. The forest devoured sound. Claire ran, flashlight jerking through the black trees, rain still dripping from the canopy. Martinez's voice called somewhere behind her, but she didn't stop. Lang was ahead. She could feel him, his presence moving just out of reach, like a shadow slipping between shadows. Her lungs burned, mud sucking at her boots. Every crash in the brush could have been him. Every echo of laughter, childish, faint, spurred her forward. She found the trail of the old cabins. Most were collapsed shells, their roofs fallen in, their windows gaping like broken teeth. But one stood almost whole, its door hanging crooked. A lantern glowed faintly inside. Claire approached, gun raised, heart hammering. She shoved the door open. Lang stood in the center. His face was calm, almost serene, as though he had been waiting. "You chased me here," he said softly. "You always would." "On the ground," she barked. "Now." But he didn't move. His eyes gleamed in the lantern light. "Do you hear them?" The floor creaked. At first, she thought it was him moving. But no. The sound came from beneath, hollow and rhythmic. Claire froze. Lang smiled faintly. "Below us." "Where they sleep." She swept the beam across the cabin. In the far corner, half buried under rotting boards, was a trap door. The wood was warped, but fresh mud streaked its edge. Her stomach twisted. "Open it," she ordered. Lang tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Are you sure?" "Now." He crouched slowly, pried up the trap door with both hands. The hinges screamed. A shaft of blackness yawned beneath. The stench hit her instantly. Earth, mildew, something older, fouler. Lang whispered, "Closer." Claire stepped forward despite every instinct screaming to stop. She shone her light into the hole. Wooden steps descended into a dirt cellar. The walls glistened with moisture, and carved into every surface, walls, beams, floor, were names, dozens of them. The 12 she knew and others she didn't. Scratched in uneven hands, overlapping, desperate. Children's voices rose faintly from the dark, laughter, whimpers, words she couldn't catch. Her knees weakened. It was impossible, but the sound enveloped her, seeped into her skin. Lang's voice broke through. "They never left." Martinez's shout pierced the night. "Claire!" She flinched, spinning. Martinez stood in the doorway, weapon raised, deputies behind him. "Step away from him!" Lang straightened, arms spread wide as if in surrender, but his eyes locked on Claire's. "They're yours now," he whispered. Then he moved, fast, lunging toward the trap door. Claire fired. The shot cracked like thunder. Lang's body jerked, staggered, and tumbled backward down the steps into the cellar. Silence crashed down. Then, faintly, a child's scream echoed from the hole. The deputies hauled Lang's body out minutes later. He was gone, his chest still, his eyes frozen open. Claire stood apart, trembling, the gun still warm in her hand. The trap door gaped behind them, the carved name staring up from the dark. Martinez touched her shoulder. "You did what you had to." But she couldn't look away from the black hole, from the voices that still seemed to whisper, even as the deputies nailed the door shut. At dawn, the camp swarmed with lights and tape. Teams dug, photographed, mapped. They cataloged bones in shallow graves, rusted jewelry, fragments of fabric. It was enough to confirm the children's fate, enough to close the file, but not enough to silence the forest. As Claire watched the evidence bags carried out, she could still hear them, the laughter, faint and hollow, threading through the trees. She closed her eyes, but the voices followed. Lang was dead. The case was solved. And yet, the children had never left. Autumn settled over the lake like a shroud. News vans crowded the access road for weeks after the raid. Reporters with solemn voices stood before the twisted camp gate. broadcasting phrases that looped endlessly. Decades-old mystery solved. Remains identified. Suspected killer dead. Parents who had grown gray waiting for closure returned to the shoreline with trembling hands, clutching photographs bleached from years of grief. Some laid flowers, others pressed palms to the earth. The town held vigils, candles reflecting in the black surface of the water. Names were read, bells tolled, tears fell. But closure proved to be a fragile thing. Claire sat through it all. She shook hands, she answered questions, she stood beside grieving families who finally had something to bury. Her face appeared on television, her name etched in articles. She was the detective who broke the case, who ended the nightmare. But when the crowds dispersed, when the cameras left, she was alone again, with the photographs, the bracelet, and the memory of that cellar. Lang's body was buried without ceremony in a county plot. Martinez went, though he told Claire afterward it felt wrong, like standing over an empty shell. "He's gone," he said firmly, as if repeating it would make it real. "It's over." But Claire knew better. Lang's words still clung to her. "They're yours now." She returned to the camp one last time, weeks after the crime scene tape had been cleared. The cabin stood hollow, the forest silent. The mess hall lantern had been taken for evidence, the mannequins removed. But the trap door remained, sealed with new planks, nailed tight. She stood above it, the wind pressing cold against her back. For a long time she listened, and faintly, she swore she heard it still. A laugh, high and fleeting, slipping through the cracks. Her hand brushed the grip of her holstered gun, not because she feared an enemy in the woods, but because she feared herself. That night she placed the bracelet back in its evidence bag. She sealed the Polaroids in another. She slid them both into a drawer, locked it, and dropped the key into the bottom of her freezer. It was an act of survival, because some cases don't end when the files close. Some cases take root inside you, whispering in the quiet hours, waiting for the dark. At her desk, weeks later, a new case folder landed. A different missing child, a different town. The kind of work she had promised herself she would keep doing, no matter the toll. She opened it. She began again. But in the silence between her breaths, she thought she heard footsteps, small ones, padding across the precinct floor, and a voice, faint as wind through pine, murmured, "Closer."